Hi, I'm Tim from timsteppingout.com. Today I wanted to talk about John the Baptist and why I think he's so incredibly important to the early picture of developing Christianity. When you read the Gospels, you get to wonder, why is this John the Baptist guy featured so prominently, especially if you're looking at it from an atheist perspective, where they didn't really need to include this guy and they didn't need to have Jesus submitting to John's authority at all, in terms of baptism. So why did they do it? Why is it so important that they do it? A skeptical view, and I think an economical view when you look at it, is that maybe Jesus was replacing John the Baptist in this kind of cult-type community. And I think that there's a lot of plausibility to that sort of view. This becomes even more intriguing when you look at the development of Mandeanism, which is sort of an offshoot or the evolution of the John the Baptist cult, where they see John the Baptist as a high and mighty prophet. There are elements within Mandeanism which look very Gnostic and have elements of Zoroastrianism and stuff like that, just like different offshoots of Christianity did, and arguably what Christianity still has today, especially in specific Gospels or specific epistles. A speculation I've made is that John the Baptist, the underlying historical figure of John the Baptist, was Theudas. Theudas can be found in Acts of the Apostles, where I can't remember who's talking about Judas of Galilee and Theudas, and it creates the famous Theudas problem, where Theudas is put chronologically earlier than Judas of Galilee. But Josephus made it very clear that Judas of Galilee preceded by at least a few decades Theudas. Judas of Galilee was around the year 6. Theudas was in the 40s. But the reason why I think Theudas underlies John the Baptist is because he was a magician, according to Josephus, which means, at least in my mind, it means he claimed to be a Messiah type of figure, or someone who has special insights into the mystical realm. But he took his followers, he has a band of followers, he takes them down to the Jordan River, he's promising salvation. That looks an awful lot like John the Baptist. And so a counterpoint, you might come back and say, well, Josephus makes reference to John the Baptist. I don't believe that's an authentic passage in Josephus. I think it's Antiquities, where he's talking about why John the Baptist had to die. I think that was an interpolation, just like the Flavium Testimonium, and I think it was stuck in by Eusebius, but it could have been anyone, but I just think it was Eusebius. It's hard to prove these things. It's hard to prove these speculations, but to me, the question is, since we can't, it's hard to prove anything. You got scholars saying, there's proof that Jesus rose from the dead. They're literally saying that in an academic setting. It's just absurd. But what you can ask is, what explanatory power does this have? It would indeed solve the issue of why Theudas was sort of sanitized the way he was in Acts of the Apostles, why he was intentionally stuck before Judas of Galilee, because they wanted to obfuscate it. They wanted to make it seem less like Theudas was John the Baptist. But it would also describe this curious relationship, this curious tradition of Valentinus receiving instruction from Theudas. And I think that detail is so magnificently important. It didn't even occur to me until recently what an important piece of the puzzle that tradition is. But the tradition was that Theudas was a disciple of Paul, and Theudas had received instruction from Paul, knowledge from Paul about how to interact on this mystical level, to talk to Jesus, to talk to God. And so the question is, why does that matter? I mean, clearly the Valentinians used the Pauline letters, but they used other stuff too. They used all kinds of stuff. They were chameleons. They kind of fit in. I mean, I think that they sort of advanced this notion of a dual-tiered Christianity, where you've got the initiates coming in and learning the literal view, seeing details that, oh, there must be something hiding underneath here, and it's our job to sort of work through some of these mysteries that are embedded in. I mean, you see it in the Gospel of Mark 4 or something like that, where he's saying, I'm going to speak in mysteries now. And of course, the reason that he said that is because Christianity was a mystery cult at the time that Mark was written, and they left it in. I don't know. It seems weird to me that later sort of sanitizers in the Orthodoxy left that stuff in, but they did, and I'm glad they did, because we can kind of discern out, we can kind of tease out what was really going on. But we have to make another speculation, and I don't think that it's all that big of a leap, considering that other scholars have sort of been noticing this. And the speculation we make is that Paul and Simon Magus, at least to some communities, were the same person. Did the tradition of Simon Magus come from Paul? Did it originate with Paul? Who knows? Who cares? But clearly the Ebionites, the anti-Pauls, and Irenaeus said it right in Against Heresies 1:26-2. The Ebionites hate Paul. So when we read Ebionite-tinged texts like the Pseudo-Clementines, we can see that there's a real hatred of Simon Magus, who I think is the same person as Paul, at least to the Ebionites. In the Pseudo-Clementines, I think it's Recognitions, they talk about a rift between a Dositheus, who is a Samaritan, and Simon Magus. And they talk about it in terms of who's going to inherit John the Baptist's authority within the sect. Dositheus is being disrespected by Simon Magus. And so Dositheus brings a rod and he swipes at Simon Magus. He starts beating him, and it passes through him as if Simon Magus is a phantom. At which point Dositheus asks, "Are you the standing one?" Which, as far as I can tell, the standing one is the Samaritan version of the Christ. Samaria is just north of Jerusalem. There's real political conflict going on between Jews in Jerusalem and Jews in Samaria, and it's been going on for hundreds of years since the Babylonian conquest. But this swiping of the rod through Simon Magus's body, and it's as if Simon Magus is a phantom, that's a clear, that is so in line with Marcion's theology. Now remember, Marcion appears to be the first user of Paul. So, and if we think that Paul is Simon Magus, then what we see here is this sort of metaphorical, flowery polemic against Marcionism and Paulinism, which I think at the time were probably the same thing. But when Dositheus asks, "Are you the standing one?" Simon Magus says, "I am." That is so important because in John's gospel, in the Gospel of John, there's all these "I am" statements between, I think, John 6 and John 10, whatever. And it's all these "I am" statements. When you look at Against Heresies 3:11-7, Irenaeus says who's the most copious user of the Gospel of John. It's the Valentinians, Valentinus. So looking at this sort of abstractly substituting the names that we've got here, another leader loses power in the Theudas, John the Baptist cult. Simon Magus, Paul, takes the power, and he is the standing one. So in this context, Simon is an inheritor of Theudas. And yet Valentinus received instruction from Theudas, who was a follower of Paul or Simon. In the polemical view, Simon is a phantom, just like Marcion's view. And of course, the Ebionites hate Marcion. And this anti-docetic, anti-Marcionite view was really ramping up in the mid-2nd century with the Polycarp epistle, with elements added to the Gospel of Matthew, with a pushback against Paulinism in the epistle to James, and you see the other side in Galatians, where he's saying these Jews are trying to make us slaves to the law. They're trying to corrupt our beautiful Christianity. But in terms of explanatory power, when you read it through the lens of obfuscation and inversion and sanitization, you can see it makes a lot of sense, but you have to do it that way. It doesn't work to read it literally. You have to read it through this mentality that there's mystery underlying. And on top of that, there were tinkerings going on in the subsequent hundreds of years as they were fixing and adjusting the orthodoxy. And of course, they had complete control of the texts, so they can do whatever they want. So that's really all I wanted to say today. Thanks for watching.